Welcome to Keep It Humane, the podcast, where we dive deep into topics surrounding kindness, compassion, and creating a more humane world, whether it's in our communities, in the workplace, or in the world of animal control and shelters. With our hosts,
Ashley Bishop.
And Ashley Bishop.
and I'm Daniel Ettinger. This show is sponsored by Tomahawk Live Trap. Check them out, livetrap.com. Welcome. It is nice to be back in I don't even know what you call this, the saddle, the chair, the podcast studio with both Ashley Bishop or AB squared or Daniel and the Ashleys as we just were titled, which is really cool. How are you both? Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
That sounds great.
Honestly, it's just, we're getting towards the fiscal year, end of fiscal year. So I'm waiting for October 1 to hit so we can buy all the things that we need. But it's going. It's going. It's like never ending, man. Like we were supposed to have kitten season like
Oh my
Hmm.
God.
stop and it hasn't. Like yesterday I think they brought in like 6 or 7. That's a lot for us in our tiny little shelter. So, it's just never
Yeah.
ending, y'all. And kudos to our officers too, man. We've just there's been some cases and just, your RPs who are just so
Hmm.
much fun.
They are so
Yeah.
much fun.
I uh I feel the kitten thing. Like I told my next up supervisor, I'm like, I brought my 3 back. Like I'm done. I need a break. Um, and then my executive director sent me a text message with this stupidly cute kitten last night and was like, "Do you want him?" And I'm like, "Well, how do you say no to that?" Especially because he's definitely needs to be nursing still. And she tried to put him with a mom and she wanted nothing to do with him. Um, which, to be fair, she also was having a hard time producing enough milk for the kittens she had anyway. So, um, but I do want to bring a little hilarity to the AB squared thing
Hmm.
because I also work with another Ashley who is my supervisor. Um,
That
and
tracks.
it has become this like constant battle of wills because so she's a little bit younger than me. And I keep telling her that I am OG Bishop because or OG Ashley because legitimately I started there volunteering when I was 13 years old. So she was like middle school age and I was at least in high school. Um and she's like, "Well, but I was here longer." And I'm like, "But I've been in animal welfare significantly longer than you. Just because I left the shelter and you stayed at the shelter, like I went on to other animal welfare things." So it's just funny and constantly um she's now Ashley 1 and I'm Ashley 2. Like if people call and they are familiar with us both, they'll ask for 1 or 2 or Officer Ashley. That's they
Yeah.
some people have referred to me lately.
Yeah.
Well,
So,
in 2024, it was surprisingly 124th in America as far as most popular names. But
check out 1988, Dan.
okay,
Hold on. You're older than me? Why did I think
Yep.
I was older?
it was the
Nope.
I mean, by not a
second
lot.
most in 1988. It was ranked the second most popular girl name in the
And
U.S.
what was the first?
What was the first? Uh, Dang it! Now you're put Jessica.
Really?
That's what it shows on BabyCenter.com.
Um, because
I don't know.
Very reliable source.
everybody I know, their middle name is Marie.
Oh, there you go.
Hmm.
Um, but I believe the next most popular name in 1988 was Nicole, which is my middle name.
I should change my first name to Ashley because it can be a guy. It can be a guy's name,
Yes,
and then we could
it
just be
it
Ashley, the 3 Ashleys, and then we could change the
no.
podcast name once again to the Ashley.
Absolutely not. She's gonna murder you.
I will hunt you down. Actually, we have a trivia group that gets together, and if there's more than the 2 Ashleys, here's a good test of time. and your knowledge of Disney TV shows, we refer to ourselves as the Spinellis.
I don't know what you're talking about.
There's a TV show called Recess, and there was like these preppy, like group of
Oh,
the Ashleys.
yeah.
But then there was Spinelli, who went by her last name because she was not preppy enough to be in the cool club. And
Yeah.
so, but her name was also Ashley, and we are definitely not the cool club kids.
You are
So,
you are the cool club kids.
How
Say
are you,
that three
Dan?
times fast.
yes, how are you?
It's a wonderful day in Southern California, and I'm looking forward to some of the sun. I just need to be outside. It's been a lot of stuff in the world of what we do, and I love it. I'm bummed that I didn't get selected to speak at the HSUS, or whatever they're calling themselves, Humane World for Animals Conference, which is taking place in my hometown of Pittsburgh, PA. So that was kind of a big letdown, but I'm not surprised. I've definitely created a reputation for myself, and I get that I'm not a safe choice when it comes to certain conferences, because I do say things, whether it's here on the podcast or social media or just in person about my views on animal welfare. And so I realize that that has more to do with me and less about Humane World for Animals. So I may still try to go just because it's in my hometown, but I may just decide to skip it and go 2 weeks later for the NFL draft, which will be in my hometown. So that seems like the more appropriate location for me at this time. But outside of that, it's things are great. Telling you, this job it is rewarding, and I say that I just had that conversation about how we directly and indirectly help change lives daily, and it's an amazing thing to be part of, and I'm just grateful that I can be part of that.
Amen.
All right, let's
Amen.
introduce our guest, a returning guest, friend of the show, Steve Kaufman, who is the founder of Transitional Leadership Advisors. And Steve, you have an awesome background. And for our listeners, when you and I reconnected here as of late, we didn't realize it's been over 4 years since you've been on the show, which is just, that's a whole nother topic for another day. But can you just kind of reset for our listeners and let them know a little bit about your background?
Sure. Yeah, I'll give a brief introduction. Yeah, I started in animal welfare and animal sheltering in 1990, and so I worked directly in sheltering or running shelters from 90 to 2016. And in 2016, I went to PetSmart Charities and moved
Mhm.
into a national role and did that for about the next 10 years in the granting space. And then in the last year, I've started this company, Transitional Leadership Advisors. So I've got about 35 years plus under the belt, 25 or so in direct animal sheltering, and then the next decade in granting. And it's really given me a unique perspective watching the industry change from pre-internet, 90 to 97,
Mhm.
and then the explosion of our industry after 98, and then the changes that have happened since then. So yeah, that's generally my background, and now I'm working with shelters and at the board level, really talking about where our industry is and where we're going.
How much of our industry has changed in the form of that nonprofit sector, and how important is fundraising for these groups?
Well, more than ever, I mean, when you look at, I use 1990 as context when I do a lot of these talks because it's my lived experience, right? So when I first came in, the rescue groups that were out there were really only just purebred rescue groups, golden retriever
Mhm.
rescue, cocker spaniel rescue, right? There were
Mhm.
no mixed breed rescues,
Sure.
very few cat rescues, and a splattering of pit bull rescues here and there.
Mm.
And it wasn't really until 98, 99 Pet Finder comes out. So, you've really exploded the communication channels that were out there. And so rescue groups, if you look at the sheer numbers, really took off after 2000. So you've got, the internet, and then you've also got Katrina happening. And so a lot of
Mhm.
groups are forming. And that puts a lot of burden on that fundraising that you're talking about. You're competing for the dollar. Um, we've really now have got a huge amount of rescue groups out there, and I'll talk about that as we continue this conversation. But we're at a point where there really just is minor philosophical differences between a lot of these groups. So when you look at a place, again, I'll use my lived experience here in St. Louis, we have 50 plus rescue groups here.
Mm.
And so that's a lot of competition for the same dollar to help animals.
Mhm.
That's interesting, Steve, and not to age you, but you've been in the industry as long as I've been alive. Um,
Ouch.
Well, it's interesting because Steve, you're one in a million, honestly. Like,
Mm.
there's not many people that last this long in the industry, like I think between Dan and Ashley and I, there's probably about 30 years of experience with us all together.
Oh,
Um,
more than that,
Yeah,
dearie.
yeah, more than that for
I have
sure.
uh,
more than 20.
okay, yeah, I'm barely about approaching 20. But it's interesting to talk to individuals who have been doing this, pre 2000s because, you know, what is the huge difference that you've noticed from then till now outside of money? Like how have you seen the shift in, standard procedures and how people look at, let's say municipal shelters or animal control?
Sure. Yeah. Well, on the procedures, I think that the internet really helped us leaps and bounds in being able to share best practices,
Hmm.
right? It was so regionalized before that you could reach out to what was local in your local veterinary community, or, in Missouri, we were lucky to have a veterinary school in Mizzou, and NACA
Mhm.
was just forming. So, we were able to get some of those best practices early on. But post 1998, 99, you really were able to start sharing those. And that's really where you saw not only the rescue group start to explode, but euthanasia numbers start to drop. Awareness starts to get a lot more visible. When you talk, I know you talk a lot about the no-kill movement, and that really exploded during that time as well, because you start to be able to find people of like mind and then come together and you're sharing sort of like practices. Now, for good or for bad, that's gone different directions, and we can have lots of dialogue on how, groups of people convening together can be a positive thing or a negative thing. But the idea behind scaling what we're doing in a positive fashion, we were able to do post 2000. So that early time from 90 to 2000 was considerably different than 2000 to 2010. And then 2010 to 2020 is yet another different experience, and it's another leaps and bounds change. I've started to write about these in decade blocks because, Ashley, to your point with longevity, I think one of the hindrances of our industry is that we don't have a lot of longevity, and we have a lot of institutional knowledge that is lost in turnover. So, one of the things I
Mhm.
see with, I collect consultant reports, right? I geek out on those. So I have this huge stack of all these different consultancy reports from shelters around the country. And I notice over these decades, we're going back to the same shelters, right? How many times have El Paso had someone come out and tell us how to fix it? Or any of these other agencies? So what I see, and this goes back to longevity, actually, is we're not passing down that institutional knowledge.
Mm.
We're
Mhm.
teaching individuals how to run their shelter at that point in time, but that knowledge is not being handed down. So when we have this turnover, we lose it again. And so I really
Mhm.
think longevity to me is the key to the success in our industry, whether you want to use the language of no kill or not, or just moving to a point where we're finding balance in the shelter system. Longevity to me is one of the keys. How do we create that longevity and keep people in the same location and not, you can go in and change stats for 1 or 2 years and then jump around and change stats, but did you change behaviors? Did you change how the community
Mhm.
thinks of you or thinks of that agency or how they interact with animals? If you're at the same agency for 10 years, boy, those local newscasters know you. You've been on the news every week with a pet of the week and a fundraiser. You can get a meeting at the mayor's office if you need to. You can make sustainable change in your community. But I think we've focused in this most recent 10 years more on internal statistics. And so now we're focusing on those, and we're not really measuring if the community's behavior is changing. We're only measuring if our shelter statistics are changing.
I love that.
Oh, that's a great thought.
It is a great thought, and it's so much more than that. So much more than what statistics are. And I appreciate us being able to look at statistics because that helps us guide what our community is doing and saying. But really, I don't know how we get us there to just focus on what the community needs. It is, it, I guess always now is the most important time, but it is the most important time to really reflect and find ways to engage and get this access to care that we push and talk about on this show all the time within the community to make a difference in not just the animals' lives, but the people that are also in that community's lives.
Yeah. And I think we've sort of drifted somewhat from that original mission of creating human animal interactions, positive human animal interactions, and building that human animal bond, right?
See,
We,
that was the phrase for a long time, was the human animal bond. And it seems like we've got away from that a little bit. Maybe not all the
right.
way away from it, but maybe a little bit.
Yeah, and I think the community looks to us as those gatekeepers, right? Just like we look to the fire department to put fires out. And not only to put fires out, but to prevent fires from happening, to teach you how to be safer within your home. Hospitals don't only save people's lives, but they teach wellness and how to stay healthy. So I think, when we started shifting our direction in animal sheltering to just looking at our internal statistics as our measure, and we weren't measuring society and human behavior statistics around what we were doing, we started to lose society a little bit. We were moving forward without them. And so as we started getting to harder and harder to place animals, we're starting to get a point where are we creating negative human animal interactions, which is, as the gatekeepers of the human animal bond that the public is looking to us as, if we want to sit there as a social service provider, like the fire department, the police department, the hospitals, we
Sure.
have to recognize that we are here to make unpopular but correct decisions. Often we have to get in there and say, this is what's best for the community we're in. And we are the gatekeepers. If we live on a planet with a lot of non-human animals, right? And we all love them in our industry, and we want everyone else to appreciate them as much as we do. And we're here to create that bond and to talk about and to facilitate those interactions. And we've sort of narrowed in animal sheltering for the last few years, up to the last decade plus, of really just saving animals' lives. And when
Hmm.
I work with boards, the first question I ask a board is, why does this building exist? And I
Hmm.
can tell you more than half the time, the answer is to save animals' lives.
Wow.
And I push back saying that's not the only reason we exist.
Wisconsin Bishop, I feel like you had
I
something.
do.
Yeah.
I do. Um, Going back to what you were saying, Steve, about um having now I lost my train of thought.
I could see you up there.
I
You were
know.
totally thinking about it,
I
and I was like,
know. Like I've
I gotta
been
get you.
pondering it. Um, but no, going back to getting the information passed down from, the staff, and so not, reinventing the wheel every time that there is a staff changeover. I think that that is incredibly powerful. But is it possible that we keep seeing this transition because there is not enough staff to begin with,
Hmm.
so that there is not the time and the ability to be able to pass that information down because we are just all in survival mode?
Ooh.
There's a little of that, but I think some of it really falls really at the board level when you're hiring that leadership. And who are you bringing in and what are the ethics that person brings with them? And so are we looking at the history and the statistics they bring with them, or are we looking at the ethics they're bringing with them and how they're going to teach their staff and bring their staff and their community and their stakeholders forward with them? Succession planning is always a big indicator for me when I go into an agency and I ask about that. Those agencies that know about it and talk about succession planning, as soon as they bring in new leadership, recognize that that leadership's job is to continue teaching the people under them so that that institutional knowledge goes forward. And I think as we start looking for how are we hiring these new individuals coming in? When you're a new director coming in, you've got a lot of directions you can look for best practices. There's toolkits everywhere. You've got Maddie's, Best Friends, HWA, ASPCA Pro. Everyone's got a toolkit that you can use, and they're going to take you in different directions. And these are important questions to ask with your leadership. How are you going to make decisions? If you have a decision-making tree, you're going to make really an operations person or a leader in an animal shelter is going to make a decision on three things, right? Is it going to be best for the animal, best for the person, or best for the community? And how you rank those and whether you're a nonprofit or a government entity matters. And when you're making those decisions, sometimes you're making a decision that possibly is not best for the animal, but is best for the community. And you have to recognize that when you're running an agency, you're running it for the entire community you're in, even the ones that don't own pets, right? I mean, you represent everybody. And so if we move to a point where the only focus is what's best for the animal, then we make decisions that might be detrimental to the community and we lose them and we lose their support.
What's
And
really
so,
interesting to
I think
me,
where you're going with that longevity
right?
is
Just
that
really quick,
idea that
Steve,
how are we
with
teaching that?
Steve, really quick, just something that I think needs to be expected more and shared more is what's best for the staff. Because the staff that we overrun, overwork, then can't make the best decision for the animal or the best decision for the community because now they're only worried about themselves. And burnout in our industry is so prevalent. And so I don't even think it's undervalued anymore. Like there's a very big push for us to understand that that exists. I still feel like we make decisions without that being priority. And I think that needs to be priority. And I think you need to find, I think it goes above just what leaders do. I think the community has to understand that this job is an extremely challenging job that causes a lot of emotional distress, and we need to find ways. We need to find ways to really highlight that because the point of that being is if I have staff or you have staff or whoever that can't focus on the true mission or the true goal of the shelter, then it's going to cause problems within.
100% agree. I mean, I can't say often enough that we're not in the animal business, we're in the people business, including
Absolutely.
internally with staff, with volunteers, with the public. Animals don't take themselves to the vet. They don't choose to not buy pet food. It's the human that has to do it. So we're answering to a lot of human problems. And I really think as we talk about the future, and I really want to get into sort of where I think we're going, um, we're going to have to start recognizing how the shift from rescue in the rescue community, those are the folks that are, hands-on, got into it to save animals' lives. And sheltering, if you got into sheltering to save animals' lives, it might be time to move into rescue as the shelters progress into a different sort of philosophy of what they're doing and how they're becoming career centers and career incubators and community centers and not centric on the life-saving part and move that to the rescue community. And that's a bigger picture conversation that I think we need to start
Mm.
having.
Mhm.
It's interesting that you say that too, Steve, because, going back, I feel like, so when I got in this industry is about 2009, and I feel like we were getting somewhere. I feel like we were getting into the community. We were having those positive outcomes. In your opinion, where do you think that shift kind of changed when it came to where we are now? Because I feel like instead of being worked with, I feel like, at least for me personally, in my experience, because I went into government sheltering, where did we change really to be that number one enemy? Because in my town, I am known as the kill shelter. And, we are doing everything we possibly can to help our community with free microchips, free rabies vaccines, free low cost spay and neuter. Where do you think that shift changed? Because I feel like the language really started to change probably around I say like 2015, where it was just like, oh, you're that kill shelter, or oh, this is what you're doing here. Where do you think that happened in our industry?
Yeah, to me, I think where I started noticing it was as we, you're right in that around 2010 and forward to 2020, we were doing gangbusters. I mean, we were really starting to see shifts where there's light at the end of the tunnel, at least
Hmm.
on canines, maybe not as much as
Hmm.
felines, but we thought we've almost got this tackled. And I think what I started to see, and I was with, PetSmart Charities at the time, so I was working with a lot of adoption groups around the country. And adoption to be a rescue, there's a pretty low barrier to entry, right? You got 5 dogs on a website, you're a rescue. And
Hmm.
so as we started working on this sort of, let's call it the last 10%, for lack of a better term,
Hmm.
those last hardest to place animals, we started to see a lot of inexperienced people making poor decisions with powerful animals, and I'm a
Hmm.
big proponent that the smallest represents the largest.
Yeah.
Like the general public doesn't really know the difference between Bob's Rescue and the Humane Society and the largest
Hmm.
one in your town. It's
Hmm.
just sort of a group of people that handle these animals. And so we represent each other. And that shift of these bad decisions being made and starting to lose that public trust, I call it death by a thousand cuts. Like I started hearing, I was working in an agency that was facilitating over 600,000 adoptions a year. So what comes with that is a lot of complaints, right? And when you hear these complaints, you start to pick up, even though they're anecdotal, you start to go, okay, we've got a lot of isms here. we got some racism, we've got ageism, we've got sexism, we've got all these things that we're doing to deny adoptions to represent ourselves. We're placing animals that are dangerous, communicable disease. We're making some poor decisions. Not all of us by any means, but there's enough that are representing us that we started to lose the sector. I mean, when you talk about it as a
Mm.
business and market share, you can see, I mean, there's even sessions right now called Where Have All the Adopters Gone, right? We're losing market share. It's death by a thousand cuts. We started losing these folks that they were willing to adopt, and they're not anymore because the experience that they've had is causing them not to go back. And so we have to look again at the human side of what we're doing. To your question, full circle, Ashley, is I think we started to lose them when we started to visually make bad decisions. Here's a great example of it, and then I'll shut up for another second. Um,
No.
you know who Amy Schumer is, right? The comedian. So
Yes.
Amy Schumer's got this amazing video out there. It's about 2.5 minutes long, and I'll send you the link. It's really funny, but it's five women that are going in to drop their dogs off for daycare.
Seen it.
And so each step of the way, they're trying to outdo each other on how
Hmm.
much they've loved animals.
Hmm.
And the reason I think this is funny or scary somewhat in our industry is comedy is generally a reflection of real life, right? And so when they put this out there, and it ran on SNL as well, enough people thought, people will get this. That stereotype of rescuers is so real that people are going to laugh at this, and enough people will get it. Let's air it. And we should be nervous about that, that's how the community is viewing us. Like the end of this skit, she was bringing in a dog that had died 3 weeks earlier, but she kept bringing it to daycare because that's how much she loved it. You know, it was this big, I can outdo you and out rescue you and out love you. And it's unfortunate to me that our industry comes off that way so much that they're parodying it on national TV and people get the parody. That shouldn't be that way. We need to take ourselves more seriously and change how we're viewed. Daniel, you and I have talked about this, I think, in another episode of, how animal control's never been viewed well in TV and radio and society and movies. We're represented as the Keystone Cops. We're represented as, sort of this bleeding heart sort of wing of animal welfare when really we've got to professionalize that industry. I know it's a long answer to your question, Ashley, but all of
It's
these
okay.
really have contributed to where we are today of losing that market share and have to reinvent ourselves. And now is a prime time to reinvent
Hmm.
ourselves so that we can change that perception in the public of us. We've changed our buildings, we've changed our pictures, we've changed our bios. We're doing everything for the animals great. We got to change us. How are we treating the public? That's where I think the factor lies going forward.
How do we
Accurate.
do that, Steve?
Not be burned out, Ashley.
There's
How do we
there's some
do that,
truth to that.
Steve? Yeah,
I
how
mean,
do
when you
we do that?
really quick when you talked about the animal control officer being kind of villainized, it's not because it was some easy target like, oh, let's just make this person the bad guy. It was a reflection of
Hmm.
those officers. Like it truly is and was.
The dog
And
catcher.
correct. But part of that could be due to what Ashley just said, which was how do we,
Burnout.
yeah, how do we get out of
I,
that funk?
I do want to put a small little plug in. I mentioned before that my kids are in a play, and
I
the play
saw.
the play that they're going to do is Madagascar, and there's an animal control in Madagascar. And I haven't seen it in so long that I forgot that the animal control net was a bad guy.
Hmm.
Mhm.
And my kids initially were like, "Oh, we want to do that." Oh, wait, no, they're bad guys, and that's not accurate. So
Hmm.
at least part of a generation is maybe up and coming.
Wonderful. No, that's amazing. And it's baby steps. It's things like that where you are interjecting. And what you're doing really, I think, and to go back to your question of how do we change that, as we move forward in sheltering, and I think one of the big shifts that we have the opportunity right now to go forward and start doing is how do we facilitate more positive human animal interactions? How is the shelter system being used within the community systems to facilitate those rather than just adoptions and relinquishment. And that's what we boiled ourselves down to now is adoptions and relinquishment. Those are the stats we put out. We talk about transparency, but the only transparent stats we put out are shelter related stats. They're not community related stats. And we need to start looking at how many human animal interactions are going on, positive and negative. And are we creating more positive human animal interactions? Are we creating career centers? Our shelterings, we could be graduating vet techs, we could be graduating groomers, dog
Yep.
trainers, creating instances where more positive human animal interactions happen. And we can do those in low income communities and black and brown communities and areas where we need more positive interactions to occur. Um, but we've taken over the last decade all of our resources into saving every animal that we can. And we've sort of started slowly abandoning a lot of these other programs because it's really expensive to save all the animals. And
Mm.
so that's why I really do think that we're on the cusp of, well, I think we're on the cusp of the next 3 or 4 years being really bad, and I'll talk to that in a second. But as this devolves, this is the time we can start to look at how do we bring these rescue groups together. And I personally think it's the shelter's jobs in each city to do that, to bring these groups together and start saying, look, we need to start reducing M&A, mergers and acquisitions. We start to reducing the amount of different groups we have with different messaging and start to coalesce around what our community needs. I love the Nationals, worked for the Nationals for, nearly a decade, and I think they contribute an amazing amount to what we do. But similar to that phrase, all politics are local, all shelters are local too. Your solutions are within your local community. And
Say it
so
louder for the people in the back, Steve.
the short time I was in Kansas City for 5 or 6 months with that shelter, and one of the ground floor aspects that I wanted to drive was how do we get the three major agencies there to have the same message? Just find common ground and have the same message. Same in St. Louis, same in most big cities. You've got different messaging coming out because we have, as you know, no overarching sort of governance board. So our messaging to the public is different, and we need to start coalescing around. And I feel it's the job of the shelters to start convening those rescue groups, bringing them together, and saying, "Look, we're about ready to enter a time where, to me, intake's going to surpass anything we've seen in 20 years." I've got a whole list of things that are about to happen starting in October. That this is going to make 2007, 2008 to shame. The sheer volume of animals we're about to get over the next 3 or 4 years is something that I think a lot of directors are unprepared for, and they're unprepared for what they're going to do. And I'm afraid of, I'm already starting to see nationally warehousing going on and numbers way beyond safe capacity. And we've seen this, we've done this over and over where these shelters, Animal Foundation lead, who remembers that back in '07? I mean, we can't let these keep getting to that point to where we just collect animals because we are not making decisions on how to house these animals safely and appropriately.
Before
Um,
we jump into that,
Mm.
yeah,
because that's really, really intriguing to understand where we feel this influx is coming from. I just
yeah,
want to talk about the dichotomy of animal shelters and organizations, and I'll speak openly and freely about my time living in the beautiful city of San Diego, where the well-known San Diego Humane Society did the animal control, but also did the animal shelter services for where I lived. And this is the dichotomy: is people could be at a park that was not an established off leash dog park. I can talk. I swear I can. And you would have their animal control officers very aggressively patrolling and ticketing in those parks. And then you show up to the dog beach, which is a designed off-leash area for dogs, and you had volunteers for the same organization asking for donations as you walk your dog to the sand of the dog beach. And I just feel like that ideology is so far off base. I get it. Animal control has a purpose, and providing public safety is such purpose. However, the approach could be so much different, right? The approach of
Education before citation.
in those scenarios, and why not utilize the resources of patrolling parks proactively to going into some of those communities that don't trust the dog catcher, but building that trust, providing resources instead of putting it at the same place where you're ticketing people in a sense to ask them to donate to their same organization. It blew my mind. It absolutely made me think about why they would do such a thing in that way. And I don't think they had a full view of perception in that scenario. Like, I'll get ticketed at my local park, but when I show up at the right dog park, please donate. Yeah.
yeah.
Mm.
I can't answer directly to that other than messaging within our industry is always a struggle. And
Mm.
when you have scenarios like that where, things are going on, proactive messaging from these organizations on why they're doing what they're doing is just vital. And we don't see enough of that, and we don't see enough of the collaborative messaging either. And then we don't see collaborative from national to local, and the messaging has disparities on that level as well.
Certainly. Well, I just wanted to share that more as my own experience as somebody who loves, the helping pets, helping people kind of philosophy. And I just thought that as we talk about messaging and talk about organizations wise, like that was something that stood out to me personally, not even professionally. Like even if I wasn't in the industry, I would have found that very bizarre. So talk about this influx of numbers. Like where is this data coming from? What are you seeing that's gonna change kind of the aspects of animal sheltering that you think?
So, well, the four or five things I'm looking at that I don't think we've seen happen at one time together. And I'm going to do my best not to make this a political show because this is it's about animals and people, not about politics. But we've got a lot of things happening starting in October and running through December that are going to cause a lot of stress to pet owners and just the country in general. So you see the cuts to SNAP, to Medicaid, and to these federal assistance programs that all kick in October. And so we've got to start recognizing that we've seen different cuts before, but nothing like this, where these are social service, human, basic essential providers. And when these start to go away, and the disparity from state to state is very different on some of these assistance programs. So real quick, SNAP, which is a food program, supplemental nutrition program, there's a lot of regional disparity. New Mexico, 23% of the people in New Mexico benefit from SNAP, benefit and use those benefits, whereas Utah, only 5%. So in our field, if we were looking at those statistics, I'm going to guess that New Mexico shelters are going to feel over the next year a much
Mhm.
bigger burden than those Utah shelters due to that one particular cut that's going on. You've got SNAP, you've got Medicaid, and all these social service programs the government's not going to be providing. You've also got another big cut going on that's not talked about a lot, but it's the low income housing energy assistance program. And so there is about 6 million people in this country that, because of the rising cost of energy, can't either cool or heat their house. And those assistance programs are also going away. And so that's another added expense that people are going to have that they didn't have before. And so you can add that on to the 1,000 cuts that I was talking about before. Let's look at FEMA and the reduction or removal of FEMA completely. So now as you have disasters and people are leaving their area, they might have come back 2 or 3 weeks later. Now they're not going to come back for 2 or 3 months later, if they come back at all. And so what's happening during that time? Well, you're not adopting, you're not fostering, things are not happening within the animal sheltering system because all these people and all this resources that FEMA used to provide is no longer there. And it's now the state's responsibility to do that. So not talking about the politics of it all, but just in general, the burden that's going to put on the states is going to be money that's not in resources that are not going towards animal shelters and into the animal causes that are happening. On top of that, with all those cuts going to all these human programs, the pressure on other nonprofits to now step up on the human side is going to be even greater, which causes a reduction in the amount, hopefully not too much, on the animal side that we're going to see because again, the focus is going to be on the human side and not on the animal side. So you're getting those pressures as well. We're also seeing, as we talked a little bit about before with the bad decisions, is a lot more attacks and payouts on animal shelters. So the insurance rates and the property rates are going up. So you've got social service program cuts, you've got insurance rates going up, you've got programs, disaster relief going away, all this things happening at once. And as we move into the next year, these are all things that are going to keep notching animal welfare further down the importance level. It also, the mood of the country when you're dealing with that much stress is not adoption. They're not really looking into those animal causes. And I really foresee intake coming in because of the squeeze that's going to happen we already see it on low income, but as we move into middle class society, that squeeze is going to cause more relinquishment or abandonment as well. And I don't think we're talking about it. Same with the, ICE when that started. You just now are starting to see articles come out about, okay, is this putting extra pressure on the shelters? And I don't think we really have good definitive numbers of that yet. But we know it is putting additional pressure on. So add that in with all these other pressures, and it feels like it's a conversation we're just not having in the shelter world yet of what are we going to do to handle this influx of animals? Are we just going to, I'm reading articles of shelters with 650 animals made for 300 animals. Can we keep doing that? Is that what we're going to do? Like, are these conversations being had of how we're going to relieve this pressure and solve these? Because there's a lot of directors that have been in place when this was never an issue. And my fear is that we're going to create situations that are more dangerous, and we're going to have, lead all over again.
Well, I think we're already seeing that happen. I've been supervising my municipality for the last 6 years, and I take the approach of One Health. I really do because, at the end of the day, like you said, Steve, we are very much a community-centric department, and we have to worry about the things that we're also sending out as well as what we're also keeping in. And I think with a lot of the rhetoric that's going on right now in the industry of, well, we have to save them all, is really doing the animals that we're bringing in a disservice. I mean, I can't tell you how many shelters I know of in Texas that are warehousing animals. They have, you know, animals in conference rooms. They have animals down the hallways and things like that because they're being pressured by the community or those beyond us to meet a certain standard when right now we haven't gotten to a place right now where we can do that, and it's costing not only the animals lives but it's also costing the people that work in the industry their sanity, because just to read comments on some of these larger facilities who are doing everything they can, people are telling them to go kill yourself, and how do you do this, and you're murdering, and how dare you kill this dog that bit somebody the other day, you didn't even give it a chance, like I feel like we're struggling in that sense of actually giving the community a good picture about what's going on. And even if we do, those that are a lot louder than us are taking over what's actually happening in our shelters.
Yeah, well, and I've been attacked online early in my sheltering career quite a bit as well, as the internet really started taking off. And the best advice I would give my staff when they were so anxious to reply to every comment or every thread, was to unplug. And to just, when we were generically, when I ran a shelter and there were 20, 30, 40 people just regularly attacking us, I kept reminding the staff, there are 2.5 million people in St. Louis. You have 20 of them that are upset with you. They're making a lot of noise. They found a couple other people, maybe from out of state, that they can collectively bully online. But in general, that's not reflective of what the entire community thinks. And the entire community doesn't follow this thread. It feels important to us and bigger, but we need to recognize ourselves in the larger scope of what we're doing. And it really comes back to, again, what I was saying earlier is we've got to start looking at, just like all politics are local, looking at sheltering as local and getting these communities and getting leaders within the shelter world to start convening those rescue groups and talking about this bigger picture and this bigger altruism of why we're here and what we're here to do. And if we continue to create negative human animal interactions and we're responsible for that, we're going to continue to lose market share and we're not going to stay relevant. And eventually, we're going to start getting ordinanced or mandated through insurance companies what we're allowed and not allowed to do anymore. And once we get to that point, it's shot. We no longer have our own philosophical outlooks anymore. Now, either the government by ordinance or insurance company by mandate are going to tell us what to do. And we don't want to hit that point. We're seeing it in the insurance industry already.
Oh yeah.
I know that there's a shelter in my general vicinity right now that is refusing specific, I believe it's breeds because of insurance reasons. Not that the community has any BSL or anything, but the insurance is refusing.
Right. And rescue groups, I think, we really have to look for, as we talked about like statistics and looking for how do we solve some of these. I think Pet Finder and Adopt a Pet are great canaries in the coal mine, right? If you look at the end of the year in St. Louis, say has 50 rescue groups, in the end of this year it has 30. Well, I should look at what those 20 that went away are, how many animals they handled, and recognize they're going to end up somewhere, right? And so if you're looking at a Chicago and LA and New York, are we looking at those canaries in the coal mine? Are we looking at those factors that are going to tell us where those intakes are going to be larger because you've got a larger constituency on SNAP benefits, or because you've lost 100 rescue groups in the last 2 years? Are we looking at those type of things to give us a gauge? And when we look at statistics and on the national level, how are we using those locally so that we're making a difference locally and not just talking about in general this broad, I call it the peanut butter approach. We have stats in our industry that sort of we spread across the country like they're even, and they're just not. Every region's got its own
Mhm.
issues, its own solutions for those problems. And nationally, we don't have one answer that answers to every region.
Is it safe to say that for the most part, not all, but for the most part, animal shelters are operating in survival mode, which is kind of ironic because of the whole, no kill mentality, where it's almost like we're not doing anything to ensure on a picture that the floodwaters stop. And I mean that from the aspects of, you kind of hinted on it earlier, in the world of none of these large organizations offer scholarships to promote veterinarians in communities that need it. It's an afterthought. It seems like everything we do is just for the moment. Stop taking on water, if you will. And I just wonder, like, what does it take for us to do something bigger than what we've ever done before, whether it's lobbying for different um, healthcare for pets, whether it's in the world of the no kill or the no kill, I'm sorry, the One Health model, um, or just something else. Something has to change because it feels like this is truly the definition of insanity in our industry. Is we're operating at full capacity everywhere for the most part, unless you're in a community that is just pretty much high socioeconomic and you don't have strays. I mean, that's just the reality of it. Um, and I don't know, Steve. It seems like that
We're
leads to,
drowning. Like we're
yeah,
drowning. Like I feel like we're
yeah.
drowning in I don't know. It's been at least these last 6 months have been tough overall and a lot different than what we've experienced, at least in my area for right now. Even though I come from the Rio Grande Valley, it's nonstop there. So I know what it's like to deal with that. I know what it's like to just be nonstop all the time. But to be in the area I am in what I call the triangle, between Austin, Houston, Dallas, we're starting to drown like the RGV is drowning. And that says a lot about what's happening in our industry.
Yeah,
Hmm.
and unfortunately, I sort of, and again, it's just my own humble opinion, but I think that's going to get worse over the next 20
Yeah.
months. But I think to your point of how do we change that, it's so much bigger than it's we've got to change how our society deals with the animals that we have and how we interact with them. That's why I keep going back to this human animal interactions and creating positive human animal interactions. The couple of years I spent traveling around Europe and I visited rescue groups and shelters and fosters in Italy and Germany and the UK, and you could see the difference on how the community lived with the animals within their society. And that change isn't something that you do programmatically within the shelter. That's what we saw after COVID, right? After COVID, everybody was like, oh, this is a great time to change our shelters. And what ended up happening was a lot of programmatic change, right? We said, we're going to do RTOs differently. We're going to do this differently. No runway. We didn't tell the public. We just started doing it differently and said, this is how we do it now, and disguised it as systemic change when it's really just programmatically changing what we're doing in the shelter. We have to change long term, 5 year, 10 year. We start to look at how are we changing the behavior of humans and how they interact with animals within society, and what are we as the shelter world doing to make that change. That's why I'm such a driver of these career centers, because you can create people that are going to go back out into society and multiply. And that's the idea, is you've got to multiply those positive human animal interactions. You know, a great one is the RTOs that really blow my mind. And that, yes, we know the science tells us that most dogs and cats don't wander more than a mile away, right? So we've changed all these programs. But for 50 years before that, we told the public, if you find a dog or a cat, bring it to a
Bring it
shelter.
to the shelter.
It's just what we told. We've ingrained it in people's mind,
Hmm.
and you can't just change your policy and say, "Oh, look, we've changed systemically how you now do this." There's got to be runways for this. We've got to look at human change behavior, and we're not doing that. We're moving faster than the society is moving and the communities are moving with us. And so we've sort of went from, this moral stance to moral superiority, where we're like going, oh, well, we're smarter now than everybody else and we're doing these things. And there is science behind them, but we didn't bring people along with us. We didn't recognize how to communicate these changes so they actually work. And we're creating animosity. People are calling us and going, but you're supposed to take the animal. I found it. I'm a good Samaritan.
Hmm.
Why are you not taking it? We need those runways that we can start to change community. That's why I was trying to get the shelters in municipalities to start doing joint communications and putting out joint press with simple statements so that the community starts to recognize one cohesive unit and not one group you can't have a no-kill shelter and have a no-kill community, right? It's got to be a community-based idea. Just having one shelter with good stats doesn't change your community outputs.
You
So
don't say.
we've got to get to a mentality of changing human behavior, which means, again, I said this earlier, if you got into animal sheltering to save animals, we need you to move to rescue and help the rescue community solve those easy problems, return to owner, those easy relinquishments where I call them uh, a non-priority surrender. It's one that you're not starving. You could afford training or food. You've just decided you're not going to keep the pet anymore. It's an easily rehomed pet. Those rescue can rehome those. Those are the ones that are filling the shelters and taking up the space for the true problem animals, the shelters. And we talk about wanting to get there, but we're not doing the steps to get us there on the shelter world. And to recognize we've got this huge untapped system of rescuers. So let me talk about this really quick. Community sheltering is a term that's caused a lot of angst, right? I would put out there that we've been doing community sheltering ever since rescues started, right? Rescues are people in the community
Sure.
willing to shelter animals. We just never really, as a shelter team, brought those groups together to make them a cohesive unit. And so they split off with these minor philosophical differences. And now you've got 50 rescue groups in your community. And now what we've started doing in the sheltering is what I would call involuntary community sheltering. You found a dog, now you have to do all these things yourself. Whereas if we would have just stuck with the community sheltering model that was voluntary and taught the rescue groups how to handle RTOs, how to handle short-term displacements because of hospital stays, or anything that we need to do in the shelter world that we could pass on to the rescue world to take the burden off of us, it's up to us to teach them to do that and to bring them together and to convene them if we want to shift that section of animals over to that community, to the rescue community, so the shelters can move forward with career planning and more positive human animal interactions. If we want to break away from just relinquishment and adoptions, and that's all we're known for, let's move that over to the rescue community. Let's scale. Some of these rescue groups are worth millions of dollars, and some of them have even built buildings, but the buildings are now only adoption centers
Mm.
because they're not doing all these other HAI and HAB things that we know animal shelters were here for. So again, I'm at a cloud level, so I'm sorry I'm sort of speaking very broadly, but if we don't start this path, journey of 1,000 steps, right? We got to do our first step because the 8-year-olds of today are going to look at the shelter system when they're 18 and they're going to use that system. What are we doing today to teach those 8-year-olds how to use this system differently? And how are we measuring it? What's our metric besides euthanasia and adoption to see if those kids' behaviors have changed? That's what I want to talk. That's what I want to be able to do.
We've had that kind of conversation, throughout several episodes of, kind of how are we educating the public what we're actually here for, and the struggle in what we have caused ourselves, I think, in the industry of, well, you don't want your pet anymore, bring it to us,
Hmm.
So, I think it's been a huge struggle to tell people, at least for those who are not in dire need, rehome your pet on your own. I mean, if you're just because it peed on your couch, or it's 14 years old and you're moving into a new house and you just don't want it anymore because it's going to ruin your house. Like, I mean, in reality, there are other pets in the world that just need a little bit more help than yours because you just don't want your 14-year-old dog in your house. So, I mean, I feel like it's been a struggle for us to kind of get that through people, and I think it will be a struggle for I don't know how we change that rhetoric too, when just 5 years ago, when I go to a conference, they're telling everybody, well, everybody deserves a pet. Well, yeah, that's great, but in my opinion, having a pet is a privilege, because at the end of the day, you have to be able to have those means to take care of that pet just like you would anything else that is alive.
Hmm.
Yeah. And I'd want everyone to own a pet. I think pet ownership's amazing. The value it teaches you as a human is really what we need. And I'd love to end petlessness, right? Everyone gets a pet. But you're right in that there are responsibilities that come along with that. But, in the sheltering system, if we want to look at ourselves as a social service provider and we are part of the community that is helping be the gatekeepers of that human animal bond, we have to start looking at the types of people we're bringing into the shelter system that are MSWs and social workers and people that are going to be helping humans and helping, again, advance careers within working with animals and creating positive human animal interactions. And if you just want to save animals, that's where the rescue groups need to come in. And those ones that you're talking about, I call them just add water dogs, right? Just add water and it's perfect. You've got your project dogs and you're just add water dogs. And so those dogs are easily rehomed within the rescue community. How do we get the public to understand that they should go to that community first? And also, how do we scale the rescue community so
Exactly.
they understand we need you to be there so that we can go on and do this other thing?
Yeah, rescue
Um,
should not have first pick of all the good dogs. They should get the dogs that need true time and attention to get them to be rescue, or available for adoption. We want the people to know that they can come to the animal shelter and get that good dog for the home. And we have that complex right now where, oh, well, I don't want to ruin relationships with the rescue, so let's give them this French bulldog puppy, right? Make them happy versus somebody in the community that should get the dog. It's a
I
tough,
do want to I want to play devil's
yeah.
advocate here.
please.
Are we opening up ourselves for the potential of hoarding if we ask for more help from the rescues, though?
I think it's up to us really, and that's one of the things that I'm trying to do within this business I created. It's up to us to go into these communities and help sort of the shelters come up with a matrix to grade these rescues and to go, look, these are scalable and these are rescues that are going to be around for the next 10 or 15 years, 20 years. You can't do these programs with rescues that are going to go under every 3 to 5 years. And one of the struggles that I've learned in working with municipalities with contracts, and I've been in charge of a few of them recently, is, and Daniel, you brought this up with San Diego as well. This idea of municipalities and nonprofits working together is doable.
Hmm.
Just because there's a few failures here and there or setbacks are not detriment to the system entirely. What it
True.
really is the approach that we've taken because it's a human-centric approach, and our industry tends to take an animal-centric approach. So we want to come into animal control and turn it into a humane society, again, without giving the runway to bring society along with us and bring the community along with us. We just make these immediate changes, and our risk tolerance level, the amount of risk we're willing to take to place an animal, is outpacing the appetite of our communities that we're in, and their risk tolerance is not the same as ours. So we are much more willing to put animals out that the community is saying, we're not in line with you anymore. And we've got to come to that parity with our communities. And that's going to be different from San Diego to Chicago to Florida to Bryant, Texas. It's going to look different everywhere. And all politics are local, all animal sheltering is local. We really need to start coalescing community wide and starting to create these mergers so that we have a larger, more durable system of those rescue groups. And I get your devil's advocate side because there are groups that are going to come and go every 2 years. And you're really going to see it in the next few years because as the price of everything goes up, those rescue groups are really just going to start to drop off. Again, watch Pet Finder and Adopt a Pet. Um, as those groups go away, who are the ones that are left and how do we scale them? It might take some of our budget. We might have to really show, hey, I got skin in the game. I'm going to take 100,000 from my budget because I know over the next 3 years I need to scale you to take these easy to place dogs so I can handle the bite cases, so I can handle the hard to place, so I can do career development and all these other social programs we want to do. Because if I'm stuck handling the volume of animals we're going to handle, it's going to break us. Financially, we're not going to be able to keep up. And we're going to have a lot of outbreaks. As we start collecting these animals, if we don't start making tougher decisions, we are going to start to see more outbreaks and more, unfortunately, hopefully not, but attacks and things going on that are negative human animal interactions. No other way to phrase it.
How
There,
do we
yeah.
oh, go
No,
ahead, Dan.
you good. You're good. You're good.
How do we get our leadership on board, because I love hearing, how do we make this a career for people who are coming in? For me as a municipality, we always get the, um that pothole is a little bit more important than, XYZ, or this new park is more important than XYZ. How do we get our leadership all the way up to our councils on board that we need staff? Because there's a lot of one-man teams out there. There's animal control
Hmm.
who's doing animal control and code enforcement and water, or there's solid waste and animal control, and they're doing all kinds of things. How do we get
I have an idea.
those on board?
You
Ask
know,
them to come in and volunteer a day.
Mm.
Well, yeah, there's the live, a learned experience, lived experience. But really, Ashley, we have the science. The science is there now. That's what's wonderful. The science is always evolving, and we know that these human-animal interactions are bettering society, and it's not just anecdotal. We've known it, right? All of us have known it
Mhm.
for 50 years, 100 years, whatever. Society is now putting the science behind it. And we are now able to go, and as long as we can professionalize the industry, and again, we can't get up there and talk about our fur babies and our pibbles. We've got to really start to professionalize how we're presenting ourselves and bring this science forward and start to speak the language of the city council and these government officials and say, look, there's a connection to increased animal control officers and humane activity and lower costs, lower healthcare costs, lower safety, or cost going into public safety, really addressing their needs. We keep focusing on ours because they're shelter specific, shelter centric in their statistics. Look, we've lowered euthanasia, and the society cares that we want low euthanasia. You're right, they do, but they also care they don't want to get mauled, and they also don't want communicable disease, and they also have other community measurements of success of your shelter besides your euthanasia number. So we have to start being able to professionalize our industry and be on these boards and be on these city councils and bring this information forward in that way that shows we can actually reduce your spending. We can actually increase the happiness in your community and how you're going to measure that. Those are the types of science we need to move forward with. And by creating careers, if you start creating a couple hundred careers and you move that to a couple thousand careers in a low income area, you want to talk about attracting attention from your city council? Go create 1,000 jobs in a low income area. I guarantee you're going to attract attention, positive attention. And we can do that, and we're just not.
Absolutely. I always tell my leadership, how lucky I am that they listen to, what we're trying to do and what we're trying to achieve. And I tell them all the time, we're so lucky that you listen because I've been other places where that's not a thing.
Yeah. You see in
Yeah.
communities where you have longevity in leadership, which I talked about when we started,
Mhm.
and agencies that have had long-term committed programming, you see the changes.
Mhm.
There's a reason in the Northwest and the Northeast that they've been able to absorb the animals from the Southwest and the Southeast. It's
Mm,
not
yeah.
complete rocket science. I'm one that I believe actually the science of animal sheltering is pretty well evolved to where we know how to run an animal shelter. We can look at the ASV guidelines and say, good, we've got a system built to run an animal shelter. To me, if you want to achieve no kill, balance, whatever you want to call that, it's two things. No 10 things or 15 things. It's resources and leadership. That's it. If you have leadership and resources, you can make your shelter and your community into balance. But
So,
we're not, we have turnover and we're not institutional loss of knowledge, philosophical changes. We need to create that longevity and we need to change the mentality to changing human behavior, not changing shelter statistics. If we start measuring the change in human behavior and we focus and frame our industry that way, we're going to bring more people along and more people are going to be interested in what we do than if we just tell them our statistics every month.
right. However, it is easier for people to understand and relate to emotions than it is
Of course.
science. And
Yes.
so here we are stuck in this dichotomy. I like that word because I've used it twice today. Of here we
But do you know
are.
the definition?
Well, I'm about to give that definition in the dichotomy third time of having this like un unobtainable goal where it's this we think that it should be no kill. We only euthanize 10% of our animals, where the reality is we should be looking at the safety and health of our communities, no matter at what cost. No matter at what cost, because the whole why behind no kill isn't what you think it is. It's truly, from what I can see, it's to help fund an organization. It is an identity. It is an opportunity to have that identity, not just nationally, but locally. Well, look at us. We're great. We're a no-kill shelter. But how many of those animals that you didn't euthanize are in the community causing potential harm to community members? Or how many are sick? Or how many are rescues are living under that emotion and are warehousing animals because they don't want to have to make that decision. And you brought it up when we get to our community leaders, how many it's just easier for them to see, oh, let's make this a no-kill city or state because it sounds good. And it has to have good outcomes because it sounds good. And we're not looking at the whole science. I'm burned out on that conversation of no kill because it's gonna unfortunately have to take um, some sort of unfortunate situation for people to see that it doesn't work. And I hate that it's going to take that because it's become so trendy and it's become so much of an identity for people that at some point, um,
It's just exhausting. It's
yeah,
exhausting.
Well, I honestly think it's a debate that we carry on more ourselves within the industry, and this
we do.
most of the community has moved
Hmm.
on without us. And you can see it in the adoption statistics, right? Like 20 years now, we've been talking about it, and we can't solve it internally.
Yeah.
And a lot of the community has just been like, well, we're just going to go get our dogs elsewhere. You can
Mm.
continue to have that debate, but you know what? I just wanted a cat.
Yeah,
I
Hmm.
didn't really want to talk about all this. I didn't want to know why you breed label or don't breed label or why you do
sure.
X, Y, Z. Just want a cat for my 10-year-old.
It's a good point.
Um,
It's a really good point.
and they've moved on without us.
The only problem is some people will only go to places that are no-kill shelters, which is interesting. There was an incident out of Michigan where a person adopted a dog from a no-kill place, and it ended up mauling her a few days later because it wasn't disclosed that the dog had previous dog bite history. So
Bad decisions.
before we wrap up, just got to make sure people know that Tomahawk Live Trap, they're celebrating their 100th year this year, and a locally owned and operated awesome trap company that ships all over the world. Check them out, livetrap.com. You can use discount code Keep It Humane. That's Keep It Humane in all caps. Please check them out, livetrap.com. Steve, anything that you want to make sure our listeners know? How do they get in touch with you if they're interested in having you talk to them, etc.?
Sure. Yeah, I don't really have a website. I've been working on referrals only. I have a LinkedIn page. They can look me up on LinkedIn, Steve
Perfect.
Kaufman. My email and contact information is there.
Well, it leads me to my favorite part of the show, which is what does what does ChatGPT know about Steve Kaufman? So you have to be specific in this one
Oh,
because, yeah,
There's
here's
a gajillion Steve
there
Kaufmans.
really is. And the first one that came up was an American pop artist who was once Andy Warhol's assistant. He became known for a large-scale, colorful works featuring celebrities, culture icons, and political figures,
I was
sometimes
trying for
referred.
that not to come out, and you outed
Uh,
me.
But yes, it shows that you had worked for PetSmart Charities. So if you're Googling Steve Kaufman, make sure you put in animal welfare. It says over 25 years of both running large and small animal shelters, giving you a broad view and challenges in nonprofit and municipal animal welfare organizations. Also known for building coalitions and moving public speaking across the country. At one point, served as the interim CEO of Casey Pet Project, overseeing the day-to-day operations. In previous years, he oversaw an international adoption program at PetSmart Charities, during which over $100 million in programs were funded,
Mhm.
placing in over 500,000 pets annually. So that's really awesome. Um, it goes on and on. So please check him out. Go to LinkedIn if you haven't done so already. Add him as a connection. That's what they are on LinkedIn, connections. And hopefully you can work with more people, helping just really getting them more focused on truly obtainable, reachable goals and that succession planning on how we build this community for our future, because it really depends on us to make sure the future for pets in this world are treated better.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for having me on. And I've listened to dozens of your other episodes, and they're wonderful. You're one of, I think, the longest running humane podcasts that I could find.
Thank you. It's not all easy. It's definitely got its challenges, and as I talked about early in the show, I've created a reputation for me here and in other places, um, and that's somewhat of my identity is I will challenge some of the things that I believe need to be discussed, and that has helped and or hurt me professionally, and that's just what you get, I guess, um, when you have a platform like that. So.
Keep up the good work.
Thanks, Steve. You're always
Thank
welcome
you.
back. Hopefully sooner than 4 years. We'd love to have you back and chat about some things here in the future. And um, remember, we always like to say, let's continue to help people
Help animals.
and keep it humane.